are able to achieve. Ms. Levi, you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to start with Ms. Starr.
All right.
And Ms. Starr, how are you currently employed?
I am a CPS investigator in Wilson, Karnes County.
Were you the investigator assigned to the Ballard case?
Yes, ma'am.
What was the initial intake that came in on this case?
The initial intake that came in for the case was medical supervision due to mother and father having a dispute and mother going to jail for.
And what did you do first when you got this intake?
The first thing I did when I got this intake was call the reporter, which was law enforcement. She was not at work, so the next thing that I did, I went to Mr. Ballard's home to initiate the case and make contact with the children. My time there, nobody answered the door. I knocked at the first mobile home because I wasn't sure where they lived. And I knocked on the first mobile home, left my business card because nobody answered the door. And then I headed to the jail where Miss Ava Ballard was being held at.
Able to talk with Miss Ballard when you got to the jail?
Yes, ma'am, I was able to talk to her.
And what did Miss Ballard tell you?
Miss Ballard stated that her children were being abused at Mr. Michael Ballard's home. She stated that she had abused the children in the past because she didn't take them to the doctor and she wasn't sending them to school, but that Winter, she was scared for Winter's life because they were tying her down and abusing her at Mr. Ballard's home. And she told me that please go and take her out of there because if I don't go and get her, she was gonna die.
All right, and just so that the record is clear, Winter is the youngest child in this case, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
How old is Winter?
Winter is 3 years old.
All right, and she's approaching her 4th birthday, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did Miss Ballard state how long this had been going on?
She did not state how long the abuse had been going on.
Now, as in the normal course of your investigation, were you aware that this was not the first CPS case?
Yes, I was aware since we did look at the history before once we get the case.
And when did that first case close?
Let's see.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't say first case. When did the most recent case close?
The most recent case.
If I told you that the final order was entered around mid-year of 2021, would that sound accurate to you?
Around 2020, when that case was closed.
After speaking with the mother, I'm sorry, did you say she had not indicated how long this was going on?
No, she did not indicate how long this was going on. She did indicate that she showed to the home and Winter was covered in her, like with a full diaper. She hadn't been changed and she was laying on the floor.
Okay. Did you, what did you do after speaking with Miss Ballard?
I headed straight to Mr. Ballard's home again.
And what did you find when you got to Mr. Ballard's home?
When I first got to Mr. Ballard's home, he was in the first mobile home, which appears to be his parents' home. He came out and I asked him that I was there to see the children. And I let him know the reasons why I was there. And he led me to the RV behind the mobile home where the kids were at. As soon as he opened the door, the first thing I saw was Winter. When Winter came up to me, I could see just how swollen and red her legs were. And that was kind of alarming to me. And then she walked up to me and she said, "Look at my back." And she turned around and showed me her back and she had a lot of bruises. I did notice a big bite mark in one of her cheeks. Appeared to be, well, I was told it was a bite mark, but it was a big bruise. And my coworker, Jackie Jones, was with me and I immediately asked her to get the baby, Winter. And then I saw the other children also in the RV. I wasn't really paying attention to the other children because I was just in shock of how many injuries I saw on Winter as soon as she walked up to me.
And what else did you see on Winter?
She had bruising on her back. She had some bruising on her belly. And that's all I could observe before her clothes were taken off.
Okay. And did you observe more after her clothes were taken off?
I didn't observe myself. My coworker Jackie Jones did observe more when they took her into CHOSA and they took off her shirt.
Objection. Oh.
And what did Mr. Ballard tell you about all of the injuries on Winter?
He told me that her legs were swollen because she had a thyroid issue. I did ask him when she got diagnosed with thyroid, and he said that she got diagnosed with thyroid when she was removed from Miss Ballard when she was born. I asked him if when was the last time they took her to the doctor, and he said that they had not taken her to the doctor. He told me that the bruise on the cheek was from one of the kids biting her.
Did you notice anything else on any of the other children?
Yes, on Aurora, she had 2 black eyes.
And did you ask how Aurora got those 2 black eyes?
I did ask, and Mr. Ballard said that one of the kids threw a toy at her.
All right. Now, based on your training and experience as a CPS investigator, did Mr. Ballard's explanation seem consistent to you?
No. I do understand kids throwing a toy at their sibling. It happens, but for both eyes to be bruised and look like they were in different healing stages and did not make sense. Also, her feet, she hadn't been diagnosed by a doctor. She hadn't been taken to a doctor, and her feet were really swollen and untreated. So even if she did have a diagnosis, they weren't giving her any medication for it.
What did you do as a result of the physical injuries that you observed on Aurora and Winter?
I did call my supervisor, Lauren Short, and staffed the case, and I called EMS to come and observe the kids and check them out to make sure that there's no other injuries.
And did y'all end up performing an emergency removal on all 5 children?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. After you did that removal, were you contacted by relatives in this case?
Yes, me and my supervisor, Lauren Short, were contacted by relatives.
And what kind of information did you get from those? What kind of documents did you get from those relatives?
We got videos. It was, I think, 4 videos of injuries to the children. We couldn't determine when those videos were taken or when they received them, but you could observe Royce.
I'm objecting. It's like double hearsay.
Your Honor, she observed these videos herself. I'm not asking what the relatives said. I'm simply asking what she observed in those documents.
I'm going to object on improper predicate, Your Honor. They haven't been properly proved up. She wasn't the one who recorded the videos. She wasn't there when they were made. She just testified she has no idea when those occurred or how they were taken.
Your Honor, I don't believe that that's part of the predicate. If she can testify that they were clearly the children, that goes to the weight, not the admissibility of the evidence.
I'm going to sustain the objection. You have a method to introduce that evidence if you choose and wish to in a way that I think satisfies evidentiary concerns. So I'll sustain the objection.
Who sent you those videos?
It was a paternal grandmother.
And were you able to review the videos in full?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
And Your Honor, I don't know how you want me to do this. I would like to show her the videos, make sure they are the accurate videos, and then offer them. However, I don't know if you want me to play them, given that they are not in evidence for her to authenticate them, or if you want to trust.
Well, she has access to the videos, correct? I mean, she
Correct.
provided them to you.
Yes.
I mean, I think if there's a way that you can identify a particular video through her testimony and lay the necessary predicate, and then we can determine whether or not it's admissible, and then you can play it once we've assessed that. But I think there's ways that you can describe. You mentioned there's 4.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, if you can.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's the best way to go about it. If that makes sense.
Yes.
And Your Honor, I'm sorry, but I wanted to invoke the rule. I think we have one witness who's not a party.
Your Honor,
All right, and that.
Dr. Spiller is on, and she is going to be my next witness.
Okay, Dr. Spiller, thank you for joining us. What I need to do, if we were in an actual courtroom, I'd ask you to wait outside. And so this virtual courtroom, I need to create a breakout room for you. We'll bring you back in when it's time for your testimony, since the rule's been invoked. So let me go ahead and just create that for you.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Starr, did you review the first video, which is about 6 seconds long?
I don't know in what order you're looking at them. Would you be able to tell me if it's a boy or a girl in the video?
So the one that I'm looking at right now is labeled CM-chat-M.
Okay, yes.
Were you able to recognize the child in this video?
Yes, ma'am.
Who is that child?
That's Aurora.
And did it appear like this video had been edited or altered in any way?
No, ma'am.
Now, I know we don't know when this is, but did it seem like a fair and accurate depiction of Aurora at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, I would like to offer Petitioner's Exhibit 1, the 6-second video of Aurora.
I'm going to object on a 401, Your Honor. It's more prejudicial than beneficial to the fact finder.
I would make the same objection.
All right, well then I'm going to overrule that objection, and you may, I will admit that exhibit that's going to be, it's petitioners 1, I'm
Yes, Your
assuming is what we'll call it. Petitioners 1 is admitted, and you may play it for the record.
Now, Mr. I know that's hard. It was a little bit hard to see, but does there appear to be an injury on Aurora's chin?
I can't see an injury to her chin. I see, well, I do. It's like a little, I don't know if it's a little cut on her left side of her chin.
A cut or a bruise, some type of injury?
What I notice more is her hand,
And what do you notice about her hand?
that it's swollen.
And are these the injuries that were observed on Aurora at the time of removal?
If you look at one of her eyes, I don't know if you could see it, it's her right eye. She does have a bruise. That's the only one that's that looked like the one she had when we removed.
But other than that, these are, in your opinion, separate injuries.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, the video labeled CM-chat-M_2, 9 seconds long. Do you recognize the child in that video?
Yes, ma'am.
And who is that?
That's Royce. I mean, sorry, that's not Royce. That's Winter.
And is this a fair, does the video appear to be altered from the way it was sent to you?
No, ma'am.
And you're confident that this is the child Winter Ballard?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, I would offer Petitioner's Exhibit number 2, the 9-second video of Winter.
I would object, Your Honor. I'm still not sure that she's laid the proper predicate.
Your Honor, the only predicate is that it is what it is purported to be, which is documentary evidence of the children.
I agree with that objection, so I'll pull that objection. Did you have another, Miss Savage?
The same one, Your Honor, our 401.
All right, and then I will overrule that objection. So Petitioner's Exhibit 2 is admitted, and Miss Levi, you may play the video.
And Ms. Starr, what do you notice about this video?
I notice bruising and swelling to her arm and hand. Some bruising on her face.
And again, are these the same injuries that were noted at the time of removal?
No, ma'am.
All right, and are you also familiar with the file labeled CM-chat-M_3? It is 6 seconds long as well.
Yes.
And do you recognize the child in that video?
Yes, that would be Royce.
And does the video appear to be altered or edited from when it was sent to you from the paternal grandmother?
No, ma'am.
Your Honor, I would offer Petitioner's Exhibit number 3.
Objections?
Yes,
401, Your Honor.
same objection, Your Honor, as far as proper predicate.
All right, I'm going to overrule both objections, and Petitioner's 3 is admitted, and you may play the video.
And Ms. Starr, what concerns you about Petitioner's Exhibit number 3?
The bruising to his eye. And when you played the video, it kind of covered it, but he did have like a little gash on his head.
And Ms. Starr, are you familiar with the final video cm-chat-m_4?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you able to recognize the child in this video?
Yes, ma'am.
And who is it?
That's also Aurora.
And has this video been altered or edited in any way since it was sent to the department?
No, ma'am.
Your Honor, I would offer petitioner's exhibit number 4.
Do you raise the same objections, Mr. Finkel and Ms. Savage?
Yes,
Your
Your
Honor.
Honor.
All right, and then I will overrule those objections for the predicate and 401, and petitioner's 4 is admitted. You may play the video.
And I'm just going to pause it at second 3, since this is really all it is. What does petitioner's exhibit number 4 show?
It shows like a laceration mark to her arm.
And again, is this an injury that was on Aurora at the time of removal?
No, ma'am.
Based on these videos, did you believe that the mother and other family were aware of what was happening to these children?
I believe that the mother was aware.
Objection, Your Honor. Call speculation.
I'll sustain the objection. I'll let you rephrase if you want to ask the question differently or approach the subject matter in a different way.
Did the family members, including the mother, express knowing what was happening to the children?
The mother did in the jail. She did tell me that there was a lot of abuse to the children. The family member did tell me that they were sent these videos. and
Objection,
when
Your Honor. I'm gonna object to the hearsay from the family member statement.
Same objection.
That portion of the response is hearsay. I will sustain that objection. Do you want to ask your question, Ms. Levi?
No, thank you. I'll move on.
All right.
Have there been any new outcries since the children have been in care?
Yes, ma'am.
And what were those outcries?
So it was Royce. Royce did make an outcry that daddy would hit him with a belt and a hanger on his face and his nose and his arms. He called it an ass whooping, and he would make him bleed from his nose every day. He did state that one of the times that he got an ass whipping on his head with a hanger, he was bleeding and there was blood coming out from his head.
And did the children express how many times they've been in care?
They did express
Your
it.
Honor, hearsay.
Ms. Levi, any response?
I'll rephrase.
All right, I'll sustain that objection.
Based on your review of the records, how many times have these children been in care?
3 times.
Did Aurora indicate who injured her?
Aurora did say that her daddy hit her. When we noticed the injuries, what appeared to us as a rash on her legs, she said that daddy hit her.
Since the time of our last hearing, to your knowledge, have any charges been filed against the mother?
I think there have.
And do you know what those charges are?
I'm going to call for speculation, Your Honor. She just said she thinks.
I'll ask another witness.
All right, sustain.
Your Honor, I'll pass the witness at this time.
All right, Ms. Savage, questions for Ms. Starr?
Yes, Ms. Starr. When you visited with my client, she begged for the department to help her children. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you agree with me that CPS would not have been involved but for my client's actions?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. When you spoke to the kids, did any of the kids say that Miss Ballard was the one who physically harmed them in any way?
When on the second outcry with Royce, he did say that mommy did give him an ass whooping once.
Okay. Did you clarify if that was on his bottom? Where was he saying he got his spanking at?
He didn't give details about how mother gave him an ass whooping.
Okay. In regards to whenever you spoke to my client at the jail, the abuse and neglect she admitted to you was just not taking him to the doctor. Do you agree?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. But again, she did ask for the department to get involved and remove the children, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did she inform you that she was a victim of domestic violence?
No, ma'am.
She never told you that Mr. Ballard was physically violent towards her as well?
Not to myself. I do know that she was interviewed by my supervisor as well, but she didn't tell me specifically.
Did she inform you that that's why she was unable to take the children with her when she left the home?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Ms. Starr, isn't the injuries that you observed during this investigation, I believe you said that the explanations given by Mr. Ballard were not consistent with the injuries that you observed?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. Regarding bruise on the cheek from a bite mark, were you able to confirm one way or the other whether that's how that injury occurred?
Yes, we confirmed with Dr. Spiller, which is the doctor that took on the case for CHOSA, Center of Miracles, I'm sorry.
When you observed the bite mark, isn't that a reasonable explanation as far as, or a possible explanation as far as another child biting her?
It did not look like a bite mark.
Okay.
If that's what,
I'm sorry, I thought you said that it was a bite mark.
no, that's what he had given an explanation to the face.
Okay. And none of the injuries, I believe, on each of those videos were or alleged injuries were what was observed during your current investigation, were they?
No, sir.
Okay, so and did you get to see any other video as far as those were awfully short clips where they was there other parts of the video that were included when you observed them?
No, sir.
Okay. And do you know what purpose those videos were taken for?
I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Okay. How long have you been an investigator?
2 years?
And what types of injuries do you frequently see during your investigations in your 3 years of experience?
I've seen physical abuse when children are getting excessively spanked with a belt. That's pretty much what I've seen recently here. This has been one of those cases where I was in shock for what I was seeing.
Okay, and on the other cases that you've seen or worked on, do you always ask for aggravated circumstances?
The injuries were not as bad as this case. So we did not remove on those cases.
Okay. Oh, you did not remove on those other cases?
No.
Okay. So the purpose of the removal is to protect the children from the current alleged abuse, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And so why shouldn't the parents be offered the services to help them to become to help alleviate the problems that led to your intervention?
They have history, so they've been offered those services before.
And at each of those times, how were the cases closed out?
Safety plans. There was also termination of another parent's rights.
Okay, that doesn't affect these parents though.
No.
So in each of the prior cases, these parents have done what they were supposed to do, correct?
Yeah.
Do you know how it is that Mr. Ballard was serving as the primary parent if he was?
Excuse me?
Do you know how it was that Mr. Ballard had possession of the children and was the primary parent if in fact he was the primary caregiver?
From what I was told, and from what I saw also from the history, he was giving conservatorship, joint conservatorship with Miss Ballard. The reason why he was the one taking care of the children, it was that he said that she was in and out of the home.
Okay. And do you know if in fact she was trying to get the children so that she could be the primary custodial parent?
I wouldn't know that.
You didn't discuss that with her at all?
No, sir.
All right. Okay, I'll pass the witness. Thank you.
Mr. Cabrera, do you have questions for Ms. Starr?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to ask you about the intake for this case. Now, my understanding is that the intake was when Mom was arrested for assaulting Mr. Ballard. Is that an appropriate characterization of the intake?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, so that intake was not Mom attempting to call CPS on Dad or calling the police. It was through some other means.
Yes, sir.
Through your investigation, do you have any evidence of Mom attempting to be appropriately protective? Any instance of her calling the police? Any police reports? Anything like that?
No, sir. Not her herself.
No. So, had you looked?
Yes, sir.
Had you made inquiries into past call outs for police, any past attempts for Mom to maybe leave with the children, anything like that?
Yes, sir. And there was none.
So the only thing we have for Mom being protective is her assault of Mr. Ballard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And have, from what I've seen of the children, it looks like there was the majority of the injuries were on Winter and some to Aurora. Is that a good characterization?
Yes, sir.
Which of those do you feel were the worst?
I feel like Winters were the worst. She had a lot of injuries for such a little child. She had injuries everywhere pretty much.
From now that there were injuries to the top of her head, did you see the
to her face? There was to her stomach area, there was to her back, and her legs and her genitals had the really bad rash.
No, I wanted to ask about the one on the top of her head. Did either of the parents give an explanation to the one on the top of her head?
No.
No. Okay. There was also noted some blistering and burns on the bottom of her feet. Did you note those injuries?
Those injuries came when she went into the hospital.
Okay. Had you inquired to the parents about the burn injuries on the bottom of her feet?
No. After my initial contact with the parents, I did not speak to the parents after that.
Okay. And so those were injuries that became evident afterwards?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But you did notice injuries that can be described as head to toe injuries throughout her body?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I'll pass.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. Any additional questions for Ms. Starr?
Yes, Your Honor, I do have a brief redirect. You spoke with Mr. Cabrera a little bit about how mom did not call DFPS or the police. When Royce made his outcry, did you attempt to make contact with her to initiate the new investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of cooperation did you get from mom?
The phone number that we're calling is incorrect, it's disconnected. The address that was put for her here in Wilson County, she doesn't live there. We haven't been able to get in contact with her at all.
Do you know if law enforcement has been able to get in contact with her?
They have not been able to get in contact with her as well.
At the end of this last hearing, did you hear the judge order both parents to submit to a drug test?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if the mother submitted to that drug test?
I am not aware if she did.
Okay. And just to clarify, you stated that when you interviewed her the first time, she stated she was able to leave the home.
I didn't get that from her when I interviewed her the first time.
Okay. And now, Ms. Savage characterized her only abuse or neglect as not taking them to the doctor. But is it also true that she admitted they weren't in school?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it further true that she has a pretty extensive drug history?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was a contributing factor to the previous cases. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll pass the witness.
Any additional questions
Oh,
from any
Your
other
Honor,
parties?
I'm so sorry. I did have one more thing I wanted to do. Did you send me 18 photos of Winter at the time of removal?
Yes, ma'am.
And are those photos accurate, fair and accurate depictions of how Winter looked when she was removed from the home?
Yes, ma'am.
And they have not been altered or edited in any way?
No, they have not been altered or edited.
Your Honor, I would like to offer Petitioner's Exhibit 5, which is 18 photos of the child Winter from the time she was removed from care, removed from the parents. And Your Honor, I did have a quick logistical question.
Okay,
The photos of Petitioner's Exhibit 5 have been sent to opposing counsel. I can email them to the court if that's the easiest way to review, or I can share my screen if you would like to see them that way.
let's, in the interest of time, they've been admitted. Why don't you, if the parties already have them, if you can email them, I can look at them so that I'm not taking in everyone else's time. Dr. Spiller, we're ready for your testimony, but Ms. Short, the rule's been invoked, so I need to send you to a breakout
How are
room.
you currently employed?
I'm a child abuse pediatrician and assistant professor of child abuse pediatrics at UT Health San Antonio. And my clinic is located at the Center for Miracles at the Children's Hospital of San Antonio. And I'm also the medical director of the forensic nurse examiner program at the Children's Hospital.
What kind of education is required to become a child abuse pediatrician?
Your Honor, in the interest of time, I would stipulate to her as an expert. I don't know if Mr. Finkel is willing to do the same.
Mr. Finkel, can you let me know if you would stipulate to Dr. Spiller's credentials as an expert in child abuse pediatrics?
I can stipulate that.
All right, well then, thank you. I appreciate that the court will recognize Dr. Spiller as such and recognize the stipulations of the opposing counsel. So Ms. Levi, you may move on to the more substantive testimony you're wishing to elicit.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Ballard, did you do a examination of Winter and Aurora Ballard?
Yes, I did. I did a physical exam of Winter. I reviewed the documentation of the physical exam as the medical director of Aurora.
Okay. What injuries did you see on Winter?
Winter presented with bilateral facial bruising, The left was more significant than the right. She had a small bruise on her ear. She had a patterned bruise to her chest. She had patterned and non-patterned bruising to her back. She had a very substantial bruising to her abdomen on both sides, both the right and left lower quadrants of her abdomen. One of them had an abrasion overlying the bruise, but there was kind of a halo effect around that lesion. She had some other skin findings that were also concerning to me that were not necessarily traumatic injury, but they were also concerning. The most significant and striking skin feature that she had was a very, very severe diaper rash. I call it a diaper rash, but it was more than that. It involved her labia. It involved her her entire genital area. But what was most striking was her thighs. Her thighs were just covered in the medial component, so the inside of her thigh and the front of her thigh was covered in a very red, very excoriated rash that I believe was most likely due to just chronic contact with a very heavy urine-soaked diaper that was what was dragging down so far to cause irritation on her thighs. She also had some other skin abnormalities. In addition to that rash and all of the bruising she presented with a very like this red scaly rash on her abdomen and on the back of her right thigh and on her arms as well. She, in addition to all of those findings, had very swollen red legs bilaterally. And her toes were peeling, and she had these little petechial bruises, not necessarily from trauma, but it just tells me that her capillaries were broken in her toes with the peeling skin as well.
Okay.
There was
If I can just pause you there, I'd like to kind of break some of that down. The facial bruising, is there a significance in terms of looking for child abuse in the fact that it was bilateral?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we do see facial bruising that is accidental in children, and it's typically on the forehead or around the eye, overlying the bony prominences of the eye. However, when you see bilateral facial bruising in a child, especially in the fleshy parts of the cheek where there's no underlying bone to cause that crushing mechanism to cause a bruise, that's when we become more concerned.
And that's because an accidental trauma wouldn't hit both sides in one go. Is that fair to say? You would need multiple
correct.
strikes.
That's correct.
And similarly, is there a significance to the fact that the ear was bruised?
Yeah, well, ear bruising is always going to be concerning unless there's a very clear history of an impact, because it's very difficult to bruise the ear in an accidental mechanism. It is possible, but it's not a very likely location for an accidental bruise. So that is a concerning location.
Okay, now when we talk about the injuries on her back, was there anything significant to you about those injuries?
Again, the location of the bruising to the back was abnormal. So she had a lot of bruising, as do some children who are mobile, but the location of all of her bruising was what was concerning to me, as well as the pattern to some of them. And so the location and the pattern of the bruising to the back was of concern.
And what do you mean when you say pattern?
So sometimes bruising will just be kind of a non-pattern round, but if something struck a child, or an object, for example, struck the child, it leaves a pattern, which can sometimes help identify, not always, but it can help say that there was an object similar to that pattern that caused the injury.
Now, the next thing I kind of want to talk about is you mentioned the scaly rash. Based on your training and experience, what does that usually indicate to you, that scaliness with skin?
Are you referring to the abdominal findings?
Yes, on the abdomen.
So I have seen that finding often in children who are malnourished. That's a very common appearance of children who are not getting proper nutrition or aren't being bathed regularly. Usually those things kind of go hand in hand. But I have seen that a very similar appearance in a lot of my patients who have been malnourished and neglected.
All right. Now we talked about, or you talked about the diaper rash in the skin on the thighs. Diaper rash is fairly common in children. Is that correct?
Yes.
What brought this to kind of a different level in your mind?
Ooh, this was probably the most extensive diaper rash I've ever seen in my several years in pediatrics. It was extensive. It extended all the way down to her thighs, and it was chronic appearing. So it looked like whatever caused that rash had been going on for quite some time based on the way the skin had been attempting to heal, but was continuing to be irritated.
And when you say quite some time, do you have, is that weeks? Is that months? Is that years?
That I'm unable to say. I can just say it didn't happen overnight.
Okay. Now, the next thing I want to talk about are those swollen legs and kind of the peeling on the toes. Do you have any idea what could have caused that?
So I've seen similar cases in children who have been malnourished. So sometimes the quality of their collagen and their skin isn't optimal, and so they can have swelling to their legs, and sometimes it's due to nutrition, poor nutrition as well, or lack of protein in their diet. I have also seen a very similar finding in children who have been forced to stand upright for large amounts of time. I have seen cases where children have been tied upright and unable to sit or unable to move, and they have had similar appearances to their legs.
So if it was reported that Aurora and Winter were sometimes tied, would that be consistent with that swelling?
If they were forced to stand, yes.
Now, there were reports that Winter had a thyroid issue that led to the swelling. Were you able to look into a possible thyroid issue?
Yeah, so because of my concerns for her height, which I'd like to touch on, I did refer her to endocrinology, and they did thyroid testing, and those tests were normal. So I don't have any evidence that she has a thyroid issue.
All right. Now, I'm glad you mentioned the height. That was actually the next thing I was going to get to. Did you have medical records for Winter from previous visits to the doctor or hospital?
I did not have any records from her pediatrician because I'm not sure she's ever been seen by a pediatrician, but I did have some records from a few ER visits that she had before this visit.
And were you able to get kind of a trend of height and weight for her from those ER visits?
Yes, I did.
What did you find in those trends?
So I found that she had a very normal height and weight up until she was 9 months of age, meaning she was at the 50th percentile. So she was almost exactly average for both height and weight from birth until 9 months of age.
And what happened around 9 months of age?
I don't know because I don't have any records what happened after 9 months of age, but between 9 months and almost 3 years, her weight, her growth basically plateaued. So she continued to gain a little bit of weight, not nearly as much as I would expect based on her prior trends, but what was really striking was her height. So her height just basically plateaued after 9 months of age, and her growth velocity plummeted and she stopped growing in length. And so at almost 3 years of age, she is the average height of a 15-month-old. So when someone would look at her, she looks very much like a very normal toddler, like a 15-month-old instead of a 3-year-old.
All right. Now, you mentioned that y'all ran thyroid tests. Did you run other blood tests that would find anything that could contribute to this kind of height disparity?
Well, when I see a child who has been previously growing normal, and when I see their growth just decrease, their velocity decrease like that, especially in the history, in Winter's history, I want to check nutritional value. So I asked for several labs to assess her nutrition and found that her vitamin D level was very low. It was, I can't remember the exact value. I think it was 9 or something, which was it's a very low vitamin D level. And that was also reflected in her bone health when we did the x-rays.
And what does, for those of us who aren't medical professionals, what is that telling you? The poor bone and the lack of vitamin D?
So vitamin D is a vitamin that's necessary for calcium absorption. And so that's important for bone health. So without vitamin D, calcium can't be absorbed and used to mineralize bone. And so that's just another marker that we have for poor nutrition whenever we have a child that's vitamin deficient. Now you can have different levels of vitamin D deficiency, but hers was severely deficient.
So in your opinion, is the most likely explanation for the lack of growth neglect?
Yes, in my opinion, it is.
And I believe the last time we spoke, you mentioned a correlation with that height and kind of emotional neglect. Is that, am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, so what I believe she has is a condition called psychosocial dwarfism. So that's when a child is subjected to an environment that I would consider to be a toxic environment with it can involve physical abuse, but it often involves physical neglect and emotional neglect. And again, that doesn't happen overnight. That's a chronic, it's something that's chronic that happens that causes a child to have a short stature.
And what would you expect to see over time in care if that is the case?
So I would expect her weight and her height to increase. I already have evidence that her weight has been increasing already since removal. Length takes a little bit more time to show an increase, but I would expect in a different environment her length velocity or her growth velocity to increase.
Okay. Now, when you saw Winter, did she have kind of a distended stomach?
Yes, she did.
And do you know why she had that distended stomach?
Yes, when she presented to the emergency room, I asked for an abdominal CT because for 2 reasons. Well, first of all, she had the abdominal bruising, which when we see it, it's concerning because it's very difficult to bruise the abdomen without significant force. And so that was the first reason. The second reason was because she had a very large, round, protuberant abdomen. And when we did the CT, we found that the reason for the abdominal distension was that her stomach was just full of ingested food. So she had just been eating as much as she possibly could. Her stomach was massive, full of food.
And this was post removal, is that correct? She'd been with DFPS?
That's right. We got the CT on the 24th.
All right.
Yeah.
And is that desire to just eat and eat and eat, is that consistent with your diagnosis of the psychosocial dwarfism?
Yeah, we see that quite often. It's like hoarding behavior, children who are hyper focused on food and will try to eat as much as they possibly can, and that's their focus. We see that a lot in children who have been starved or who have been neglected.
So essentially, she's not sure she's going to be able to eat again, so she's eating as much as she can.
Yes.
Right. Did you have any other concerns about Winter that you have not yet touched on?
Well, she had some interesting language use for a 2-year-old. She was actually very, her vocabulary was quite developed for her age, which I found interesting. However, she was calling the staff certain terms that are very atypical of a 2-year-old. So that was of concern because that just kind of tells me the kind of environment that she was living in. So
And
that was of
just
concern.
so the record is clear, you're talking about curse words, is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, she was calling nurses and other staff curse words.
And you don't usually see that in 3-year-olds.
No, I do not.
And is there anything else about Winter in particular that you would like to touch on?
Well, I would. I did see her back in clinic on March the 8th. So she had been in care for that amount of time. And I will say that all of her bruising had completely resolved. She didn't have a bruise on her. All of the scaly red rash that I mentioned that I believed to be due to a combination of poor hygiene and malnutrition, that was all gone, totally resolved. The awful diaper rash that she had between her thighs and on her labia was healing. It wasn't completely resolved. I wouldn't expect it to be because it was so severe, but it was certainly healing. And she had she had a viral exanthem, which is something that normal children get, which was not of concern at all. But all of the findings that were concerning, even her leg swelling, all of that had resolved when I saw her in follow-up.
Now, what kind of injuries did you see when you reviewed the records for Aurora?
Aurora had some eye bruising. She had one on the side of her eye and one on the medial portion of her eye close to the nasal bridge. But I don't believe she had any other injuries that I assessed.
And does that have the same kind of bilateral concerns as we talked about with Winter?
Yes, it does.
Did you see any other concerns in Aurora's records?
I honestly didn't do an extensive review of her records. I know that she had a thyroid. She had been previously diagnosed with hypothyroidism, and I referred her to the endocrinologist as well. The same time I referred Winter, but I did not dive deep into her records, to be honest.
That hypothyroidism, is that something that needs regular treatment by a physician?
Yes.
So would it endanger Aurora if that had not been looked at in several years?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'll pass the witness.
All right, Ms. Savage, do you have questions for Dr. Spiller?
Yes, Ms. Spiller, in regards to the bruising that you saw on Winter, all of that would have been sustained within a couple of weeks to possibly a month of your time of examining her, correct?
Well, we're not able to date bruises, so I can't talk about the timing of the bruise.
Would you agree with me that it didn't happen, 2-3 months ago?
Unlikely, correct.
Okay. And then in regards to the rash, well, actually, in regards to her medical records, you were only able to review up to 9 months, correct?
Well, she had, I think, 3 visits. I may have had a birth weight and then 2 other visits, including the 9-month visit to the ER. And so those are the only weight parameters and height parameters that I have.
Okay. So you're not able to determine when her growth started to plateau. That's just the last set of medical records that you have that you were able to review, correct?
Right. It was sometime after 9 months of age.
Okay. And you don't have the biological mother or the biological father's growth history or medical records. Is that correct?
I don't.
Okay. So you don't know if the child's predisposed to any kind of genetic disorders or anything like that that could have resulted in her height deficiency.
I don't have any past medical records because I don't think she ever went to the doctor.
But you don't have any of the family history either, correct?
Correct. I don't have family history at this time.
Okay. And then level D deficiency, that is pretty common in a lot of kids. Is that correct?
Vitamin D deficiency, to some degree it is. Hers was more severe than we typically see.
Okay. Do you know how long it would take for the child to become vitamin D deficient?
Yeah, so it doesn't, so because I have the low vitamin D level in combination with the abnormal findings on the skeletal survey, those things go together. So I have, if I had vitamin D deficiency in normal appearing bones, then I wouldn't be as concerned. But because I have a low vitamin D and poor bone health, it tells me that it had probably been going on for quite some time.
Okay, but again, you don't have a specific time frame for that, just that it was quite some time.
I can't tell you exactly when. I can't tell you exactly when her bones started to show osteopenia, but it does take time.
I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Mr. Finkel, do you have questions for Dr. Spiller?
Dr. Stiller, you mentioned that a lot of or all the bruising that you observed has healed. My question is the things that you've observed, are these things that concerns that can be overcome with classes or training or anything like that?
I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
Well, so for example, vitamin D deficiency, is that something that can be discussed and talked with parents and educate them on what vitamin D deficiency is and how to avoid that?
Yes, you can with vitamin D deficiency, yes.
Okay, what about with the other things that you've observed? For example, like if some physical object like a belt or something was being used to discipline, is that something that can be discussed and talked with the parents and so that they can overcome that and not do that?
If it was as simple as just disciplining with an object, yes.
Did you observe any actual lacerations?
She had a wound to her abdomen. It wasn't necessarily a laceration. It wasn't linear, but it did break the skin and there was a large amount of bruising surrounding it, but I wouldn't consider it necessarily a laceration.
Okay. And was the child actually able to give you any explanations of any of the bruising or things that you observed?
No.
Nothing at all?
No. She was 2 years and 11 months when I saw her.
And were you able to actually interview either or both of the parents?
No.
So any information that you got concerning the children came directly from the department?
Most of my information came from communication with medical professionals in the hospital, including my forensic nurse team, some from the department, and the staff member who brought her to my clinic where she was residing at the time.
Okay. Thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Mr. Cabrera, any questions for Dr. Spiller?
Thank you, Your Honor. You spoke briefly about pattern bruising, and that was relating to the bruises on Winter's back.
She did, yes, she had one linear and curved area to her back, and she also had a V-shaped bruise to her chest.
And you were explaining that the pattern bruising can give some indication of the things that may have caused the bruising. Is that a fair?
It sometimes can, often it does not, but it just says that an object was used, but it doesn't always tell you what object it was.
In this case, based on your experience, did it lead you to any conclusions as to what was used to hit her?
No.
Okay. I also wanted to talk to you about her genetic height possibility of genetic height deficiencies, or just her height deficiencies in general. If a person had, if a height deficiency was caused by something genetic, and there was, let's say, a plateau in her height, would you also see a corresponding, in someone her age, a corresponding plateau in her weight? Would the weight also stop?
So let me make sure I understand your question correctly. So if you see, well, first of all, you don't really see a child growing normally and then all of a sudden stop growing normally. Usually, if there is, a genetic condition causing height deficiency, they start off on the lower end of the curve. They don't start off completely normal for some time and then have a problem.
So
but with regards to the weight,
what you're saying is that it's not typical for, if there was some kind of natural cause, for that to manifest arbitrarily at 15 months.
Not in the way Winters did. So both the weight and the height decrease typically. So usually it's the weight first and then the height takes a hit.
I see. If there was some kind of genetic cause.
No, that's due to neglect. So when a child is being neglected and they aren't growing properly because of that, usually the weight will start to, a child won't be gaining as much weight as they should be, or they will decrease in their weight. And then as that continues, their height will then take a hit. But usually it's the weight first and then the height.
So the manner in which her height and weight both decrease is atypical for some kind of natural cause.
Atypical, yes.
Okay. And in this case specifically, we have a height deficiency, a weight deficiency, poor bone health, and signs of physical abuse. Is that a pretty fair summarization of the issues she came in with?
She did have those things, yes.
Okay. And all of that taken together, is there anything that can come to mind that could be explained away naturally?
No, not with an organic cause. No.
Okay. Thank you. I'll pass.
Ms. Levi, additional questions for Dr. Spiller?
Very briefly.
All right.
Given the shape that Winter was in, does it concern you that she had no other medical records?
Yes, it does. I did say that she was a victim of multiple things, including medical neglect, and that is because there was no one to address her poor growth. And if that had been caught earlier, if she had been taken to a physician, then that would have been addressed, and her nutrition level could have been improved, hopefully, at that point. Also, the degree of the rash on her genital area and her thighs, the fact that hadn't been receiving any medical care was also of concern to me. So I was concerned that there were no medical records.
Now, I know that when you say, it didn't happen overnight, and I think you used the term quite some time, I know you're being purposely vague because you can't pinpoint it, but is it fair to say we're talking about months?
With regards to the rash?
With regards to the growth issues?
I think the growth took months at least to
months.
Manifest.
So we're talking
yes.
A minimum of multiple months for this to take hold.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Finkel briefly asked you about kind of education and remedial efforts. Is it fair to say you've seen a lot of child abuse?
Yes, I have.
And have you seen a lot of neglect?
Yes.
And does a lot of that neglect come from a lack of education?
It can.
In this case, in your professional opinion, does this go beyond just a lack of education?
In this case, it does, yes.
would any reasonable person know that the treatment of these children was not okay?
Yes.
And would any reasonable person know that the situation they were in was endangering to their
Yes.
health and safety?
Yes.
In your opinion, would anyone who knew what was happening to these children and did not call for CPS or law enforcement or EMS, would they be leaving those children in endangering situations?
Absolutely.
Now, based on the severity of this, would you say that these injuries caused serious bodily injury?
Yes.
And could they have potential long-term effects on these children?
Yes.
I'll pass the witness.
Additional questions from any other party for Dr. Spiller at this time? No, Dr. Spiller, thank you so much for your testimony and for your work on this case. I do appreciate that, and I can dismiss you at this time.
Great. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. All right, and Ms. Levi, I think you indicated you'd like to call Ms. Short as your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, it will be very short, but I do think I have 2 points I need to get in through her queue. Ms. Short, you're the investigation supervisor for this case, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, we covered a lot through Ms. Starr, but I think there are a couple things I just need to get in through you. After the removal, were you able to observe Aurora at the CPS office?
I actually observed her at the Children's Alliance Center where the forensic interviews were occurring.
Okay, I apologize. What injuries did you see on Aurora that were not seen originally at the scene?
She had a lot of like bright red marking on the the inside of her inner thigh, just right below her private area.
And how long have you been with CPS and investigations?
Just about 7.5 years.
And based on your experience over those 7.5 years, did you have an opinion as to what that rash could be?
I believed it was severe diaper rash from what at first glance.
Did you see anything else of concern on Aurora?
She did have 2 bruises, like what appeared to be healing bruises under each eye.
Now, did you meet with the mother at the Wilson County Jail?
I did.
Now, did she indicate to you what, if anything, she knew about what was happening to her children?
She did.
What did she say?
She was aware that that the kids were being physically disciplined and hit. There was a point in time where she had seen one of the children with what she said was a dangling foot. She was been told that Winter was tied up by Michael. She was aware that Michael was starving Winter and other children when they were being punished. And then she also told me that to calm the children down, Michael would give them marijuana.
Did she indicate when she first became aware of these concerns?
They started after, she said that they had started like from what she remembered, around November of 2022 after she left the home.
Okay, so she indicated that she was safely able to leave the home.
Yes.
Did she indicate why she never called the police?
She initially said that she was scared that he would harm her. He meaning Michael, I apologize.
Okay, and that's true even though she was out of the home.
Correct.
Now, based on what she told you, she had left the home 4 months earlier, 3 months earlier?
Correct. Correct.
Right. And she had not made any kind of reports since then?
Correct.
Do you know if any charges have been brought against Miss Ballard?
They have.
What is that charge?
Injury to a child, endangerment.
Do you know if she's cooperating with law enforcement?
She is not.
And do you know if she submitted to the drug test ordered by this court?
I'm not aware, but I'm not aware if she has.
I'll pass the witness.
So Ms. Short, Ms. Ballard stated all the physical abuse for the kids started after she left the home, correct?
Yes. I would say the more intense of this situation.
Okay. So she was not a participant in the physical abuse of the kids.
Not this
In
current
regards to
time.
making police reports, did she tell you that a report had been made of the physical abuse in December?
She told me that she told a friend and that friend reported it.
Okay. And that's because she was fearful for her own safety due to the violence of Mr. Ballard. Your Honor, she
Sorry.
testified.
I'm sorry, what was the objection?
Speculation. Ms. Short doesn't know why.
Your Honor, she testified that the mother told her she was scared of Mr. Ballard, and that's why she didn't take the kids.
I'll overrule the objection, so you can continue your response, Ms. Short.
Can you remind me what it was again? I'm sorry.
Ms. Ballard,
My service is kind of going in and out, so I apologize.
no worries. Mrs. Ballard had her friend call the police because she was fearful for her own safety due to the violence of Mr. Ballard. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
Questions for Ms. Short?
You said that Ms. Ballard had left the home approximately 4 months prior. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it your understanding, or what is your understanding about her involvement during those 4 months?
She would pop in from time to time to bring the children food.
And when you say pop in, like, what does that mean?
Come visit. I'm just using the term that she used, but she would come to the home, as you can say, to check on the children and bring them food.
Okay, and prior to her being arrested for assault, she never raised any issues concerning the children, did she?
Not to the department or law enforcement. Her personally, no.
Okay. And do you know what her intentions were or at that time?
Intentions in what do you mean by intentions?
As far as well, first of all, do you know what caused her to commit the assault to begin with?
Yes.
What was that about?
She informed me that she was upset when she saw Winter laying on the floor and asked Michael what happened or what was going on, and Michael picked her up by an arm and threw her into the shower, her meaning Winter. And then he proceeded to turn on cold and hot water, and at that point she, as she told me, saw orange, and next thing she knew, she was being arrested.
Okay, so when I talk about her intent, I meant like during that 4-month period that she supposedly was gone. Did she indicate to you what her intent was as far as with the children? Was she seeking court intervention on her own of any kind?
At the time that she left, she felt the children were safe only because they had a place to live.
Thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Thank you. Ms. Short, did Mom give an explanation to you as to why she left?
She did not.
Okay. And so based on your discussions with her, your understanding is that she was aware of the abuse to her children after she left because of her pop-in visits?
Correct.
Okay. And when she popped in, she would see the condition of the children or what had been going on?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have any knowledge of any attempt by mom at that point to attempt to call a law enforcement or to remove the children from that location?
No, each incident she talked to me about, she never called law enforcement, to include this recent incident that led the department to remove the children.
Thank you. And by her admission, that's about a 4-month period?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. I'll pass.
Ms. Short, you mentioned current charges against Ms. Ballard. Are there any charges that you're aware of that Mr. Ballard is facing?
Just injury to a child.
All right.
Your Honor, may I have a follow-up?
Yes.
I also
May.
have one.
Let me start with Ms. Levi then. Ms. Levi.
When Miss Savage was questioning you, she made it sound as though the mother asked her friend to call law enforcement. Is that what the mother said to you, or did she just say that she told a friend and that friend took it on herself to call law enforcement?
She told a friend. She didn't ask the friend to call.
Thank you. I'll pass.
Ms. Savage.
Do you know what law enforcement did after that police report came in December?
I am not sure what they did.
Was the department called at that point?
In December, right?
Yes.
No, we were not called by
Okay.
anyone, to include mom, her friend, or law enforcement.
Do you know if any charges resulting from the December incident were made against Mr. Ballard at that time?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, so police get called and then they do nothing. They leave the children in the home in December. Is that correct?
I am not aware if they did nothing. I wasn't with them when they were called out.
Okay, but the children were left in the home in December. You'd agree with me?
Yes,
Okay. And then February comes around, mom physically sees the abuse and then takes action at that point, correct?
she had previously seen physical abuse prior to this incident.
Okay. Objection, non-responsive. Ms. Short, in that moment in February, mom goes and sees it and takes action, correct?
Takes action in you mean like by calling a friend?
Your testimony as to what she told you occurred that day, the day police were called. What occurred? You just testified to it. If you'll testify to it again.
I apologize. You're cutting in and out. So if there's things I'm missing, again, I apologize. So that the day as in why we were involved, correct? Not December, because I have no information about December.
Yes, the day that you
Okay.
guys became involved and that the children were actually removed, it was because of the mother's actions, correct?
Yes, for assaulting Michael.
Okay, for trying to protect her daughter, correct?
Objection asked and answered.
I have not asked that question, Your Honor.
I'm going to overrule. You can answer the question, Ms. Short.
Were you asking if like the department removed due to her
No.
actions?
No, Miss Short. Like, listen
sorry,
to the
I
question
apologize.
I just asked you. Miss Ballard, by her own statement to you, took action against Mr. Ballard after he physically assaulted her daughter in front of her, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so she was acting to protect her daughter in that moment, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Anyone else? If not, any additional witnesses, Ms. Levi?
No, Your Honor, if there are no objections, I do have the final order from the previous case. I would like to offer it as petitioner's exhibit number 6. Just because I know that Mr. Finkel was asking about the outcome of that case, and we do intend to consolidate it at some point.
Okay. Any objection to the court admitting the prior order as petitioner 6?
No objection, Your Honor.
No,
And
Your Honor.
it limited the mother's rights and made Mr. Ballard primary. And I can email it to the court and all the parties.
Okay, thank you.
I think it would be relevance for this hearing, but beyond that, I have no objection.
All right, well then I'll overrule that objection and I'll admit petitioner's exhibit 6. And with that, is there any additional testimony or evidence from the department, Ms. Levi?
No, Your Honor.
Any other testimony or evidence from either Ms. Savage or Mr. Finkel?
No.
All right, Mr. Cabrera?
No, Your Honor, I rest.
All right, so with that, Ms. Levi, I'll let you proceed with the argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. The older of these kids have been in care 3 times. There's been substance abuse, there's been domestic violence, and now we have very serious medical neglect, physical neglect, emotional neglect, and physical injury. These parents have had ample opportunity to step up for their children, to work services, to do the right thing. And we find ourselves in a position where no reasonable parent would be. We're asking for aggravated circumstances based on the grounds that the children were a victim of serious bodily injury inflicted by the parent or another person with the parent's consent. We are also asking that the court find that the parents engaged in conduct that would constitute injury to a child and abandoning or endangering the children. Dr. Spiller testified that this would have been a minimum of months. Mom's statements to Ms. Short have to be viewed through the lens of self-serving. She admittedly knew what was happening, and she's trying to make her culpability look less by saying it started after she left. But she knew, the family knew. We have images of previous injuries. We have the growth disorders that could have lifelong consequences. These children have been horribly abused, horribly neglected, and enough is enough. No parent should have allowed their children to remain in those situations. I know the mother would say that she should be excused for endangering her children because she finally snapped and assaulted dad, but she had been out of the home for months. She could have disappeared as she now has after calling the police, and she didn't. She didn't even ask her friend to call the police. She wants credit for telling a friend what was happening, but not asking them to report. She wants credit for attacking dad after the damage was done. At no time did she take a reasonable protective action. And the actions she did take were too late. So we are asking that the motion for aggravated circumstances be granted as to both parents, and that the case be set for trial and the department be relieved of the obligation of a service plan.
Thank you, Ms. Levi. Ms. Savage?
Yes, Your Honor. I'd ask that the motion for aggravated circumstances against the mother be denied. The testimony today was that mother herself was a victim of domestic violence. She left the home in November and was unable to remove the children at that time. She became aware of the abuse. Police were called in December. Nothing was done. Those children remained in the home. Victims do not have the strength or support in order to get a lot of help. They don't have a lot of understanding on how to get those children out of that system. She kept as much contact as she could to try to check on the children. When she was there and witnessed the abuse physically happening in front of her, yes, she absolutely snapped. Did she probably take the right course of action? No, but she did what she thought she had to do. Honestly, it was probably instinctual, and she tried to defend her daughter. Because of that action, CPS was involved, and those children were removed from a situation they didn't need to be in. When CPS shows up to the jail, she's cooperative. She begs them to remove the children and to give her some help to get the children to a safe place. This is a mother who clearly needs services, who clearly needs help, not only to get into a situation where she can care for her children, but to make sure the children will be in a good place. She clearly loves her children. She obviously was not in agreement, and this abuse wasn't happening by her permission or by any kind of cooperation. If that were the case, she wouldn't have assaulted Mr. Ballard when she saw what was going on. I ask that the court give this mother a chance to do services and to hopefully, possibly be reunified with their children. We have very young children. I think the oldest is 10. We're not going to be able to obtain any kind of permanency for these kids for some significant period of time. I think we need some time to get professionals involved to see if she can be rehabilitated, and to participate in services for the children's benefit. So I would ask that the aggravated circumstances against the mother be denied at this time, and that the department provide services to this mother to see if she can be rehabilitated in the children's best interest.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Mr. Finkel?
Thank you, Your Honor. On behalf of Mr. Ballard, I would make the same request and argument. I'd ask that the department's motion be denied. While the department may have been involved in this family's lives previously, it's my understanding that they were for different reasons. Mr. Ballard successfully completed services in those other cases. And so we'd ask that he be given the opportunity to better himself for the sake of his children, and that he be given the opportunity to address these issues in this case, and that would be in the children's best interest ultimately. So we ask that you would deny the department's motion.
Thank you, Mr. Finkel. And Mr. Cabrera?
Your Honor, I'm in line with the department, and I'm asking for a finding of aggravated circumstances. I would remind the court that Ms. Ballard should have known, and Mr. Ballard should have known, the expectations and the resources available to them, specifically because we've been here before. The prior case was the same, in my opinion, not as worse, not as bad, but for the same issues, through which mom and dad both went through a service plan and should have known the expectations to them. In that case, we had abuse to children. In this case, in my opinion, we have worse abuse to children and what appears to be a cycle of violence and neglect. I do not feel that mom's assault of Mr. Ballard was an appropriate act of protection for the children. She had knowledge before she left. She had knowledge after she left. You know, when calling the police is an option at any point, especially if you're out of the house, assaulting the perpetrator after is not an appropriate. All it shows is a cycle of violence that the children have been exposed to, and I'm asking for finding of aggravated circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. And finally, Ms. Gregorio, as the CASA assigned to the case, I'm interested in your input as well. You've heard the testimony today. You're aware of the children and their needs and their experiences. What is your recommendation of the court today? You can unmute yourself and provide that, or Mr. Scheck-Snyder, on behalf of Ms. Gregorio, may share that. Mr. Scheck-Snyder?
Yes, Judge. It's incredibly sad, the things that the children have been through, the things they've witnessed. I, myself and Ms. Gregorio, we were just recently appointed to the case. I haven't gotten to talk to the children about what their wishes are and their hopes for their parents. As far as the mom goes, I'm very torn on a recommendation. With the dad, with the extent of the abuse and the things that these kids have been through, I agree with aggravated circumstances, but with mom, I'm really torn. I think that she could have taken more action, but we all know that individuals that experience domestic violence, the victims of domestic violence, it takes them multiple times to get out of those situations. I think that we could potentially still work a little bit with mom. I'd like to at least try through the initial term to work with mom, but I really don't know what the right recommendation is at this point.
Your Honor, may I make a very brief rebuttal?
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, mom's not here. She's evading law enforcement. She's evading the department. She didn't submit to her drug test. She's not here. If she realizes that she messed up and she wants to get her kids back, she needs to be here asking for that in person, and she's not. And I think that speaks volumes.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Your Honor, if I may just real quickly respond.
Yes.
I just wanted to remind the court two things. One, that at the outset of this case and the initial removal, Mr. Ballard agreed to the department having custody and agreed to do services at that time, clearly with the understanding that there was going to be services. There was no mention at that time of the department coming forward with aggravated circumstances motion. In all aspects, when that hearing was taking place and we were conferring, the idea was that he was going to be doing services. Second, the last case that the department took conservatorship, Mr. Ballard was used as a safety plan, and the perpetrator in that case was the other father, not Mr. Ballard at that time. So I just wanted to remind the court that and clarify that.
And Your Honor, I'm sorry, but Ms. Savage explicitly asked me to verify I would not seek aggravated circumstances, and I told her I would not. I really personally resent the implication that I misled the parties in terms of the department's position, because I was very upfront that I could not make that assurance.
That wasn't made to me.
All right. At this time, the court has heard some really very upsetting testimony today. And it's evidence of endangering conduct on the part of both Mr. Ballard and Miss Ballard. And there's evidence that the department has worked with this family in the past, that they have benefited from services that have been offered to them. At this time, I'm going to deny the motion. I'm going to deny the motion. I'm going to deny the motion. And I'm doing that with a very heavy heart because I am not optimistic about the chances or a potential for rehabilitation of either parent given the facts of this case. But I think it's better evaluated after a few months of services. And I can order the case accelerated at any point in time. And I may very well do that. But I'm not at this point relieving the department of their obligation to provide reasonable efforts to assess the potential for reunification. I want to say out front that these parents, the conduct that I've heard is beyond distressing. And the court agrees with the testimony of Dr. Spiller that there is no reasonable explanation for the injuries to these children or the profound neglect. Today is the first time I've ever heard of psychosocial dwarfism. And the amount of neglect that had to be involved in subjecting Winter to that condition is profoundly disconcerting. But I am reluctant at this point to make determinations that are going to send this case immediately to trial. But I feel like I've heard what would amount to significant testimony at trial that would establish endangering conduct on the part of these parents. And so I want to say that for the record, that is clear. And I don't know who anyone in any reasonable person who could disagree with that assessment. So there's a lot to overcome, and there's no guarantee that you will. Even with the provision of services, I think at this point in time, there's beyond a huge amount that would need to be proven on the part of both of these parents to show that they're capable of meeting the needs of these children and that it's in their best interest to be returned. But you know, I do feel like I'm better able to evaluate the trajectory of this case and whether or not reunification can be possible after at least some attempt at providing services and assessing the involvement and the overall situation of the parents going forward. And I agree with Ms. Levi significantly that Ms. Ballard's absence today and any failure to comply with orders that were previously issued by this court are very compelling evidence that this court can consider going forward to expedite the trial at any point. But I'm denying the motion, but it wasn't easy to do that. So we will be back for our status hearing on April the 12th at 10:30. If there's nothing further, all parties are excused. I'll hop right on for that adoption, Mr. Cabrera. So.
Thank you.